Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're opening a door into a system really designed for maximum secrecy. We're talking about the correctional crisis in Alabama, which was starkly laid bare by that HBO documentary, The Alabama Solution. Our goal here is to take the sources we have and really distill the reality of these, well, systemic failures, the unconstitutional conditions, and frankly, a shocking lack of accountability. It's persisted for decades, often, deliberately hidden from public view.
And the scale of this failure, it's almost hard to wrap your head around. We're talking about the Alabama Department of Corrections, ADOC. It houses roughly 20,000 people. But look at the resources. These prisons are running at nearly 200% capacity, 200%.
Right.
And they have only about one-third of the staff they actually need to manage things safely.
Right. That sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It absolutely is. And the data proves it out. Alabama's incarcerated population faces the highest rates of overdose, murder, and suicide in the entire nation. That's the brutal context you need to keep in mind as we talk through this.
Yeah, that context makes the story of how this documentary even got started even more, well, compelling. The filmmakers, they were initially given access back in 2019 to Easterling Correctional Facility. It was supposedly for a volunteer event, pretty standard view they were trying to get. But off camera, incarcerated men were risking immediate punishment just to pass messages, whispering about beatings, stabbings that went unreported, truly squalid conditions.
Exactly. Stories that hinted that Alabama's so-called solution was really just hiding the problem. And apparently, when a guard realized the filmmakers were getting a bit too close to that truth, boom, filming shut down immediately.
Wow.
But that action, that shutting down, it actually became the catalyst. The investigation ended up taking 6 years, and it had to pivot completely. It had to rely on the very thing ADOC was fighting to control: contraband cell phones.
Cell phones inside the prison.
Yes. Leaders of the Free Alabama movement, fan people like Robert Earl Council, who goes by Kinetic Justice, and Melvin Ray, they used these illicit phones to capture evidence, photos, videos, calls, and share it out.
Okay, let's pause on him for a second. Free Alabama movement. For listeners, what's their main goal? What are they about?
That's really crucial context, yeah. FAM is essentially a grassroots movement. It's made up of people currently and formerly incarcerated in Alabama. Their mission is kind of twofold. One, demanding basic human rights inside. And two, trying to leverage the economic power of prison labor, which we'll definitely get into later, to force systemic change. They're the ones who made the conscious choice, knowing the risks, to act almost like citizen journalists.
Creating this uncontrollable tear in ADOC's secrecy, as you put it.
Precisely. A tear ADOC couldn't patch up.
And the footage they got out, it showed things no official report would ever mention. You're talking rat-infested cells, actual piles of human waste because the plumbing failed, rotting food, floors streaked with blood, and men just near catatonic on drugs. The level of human misery was just raw, undeniable.
And it points to this really sinister paradox. ADOC constantly complains about contraband, right? Drugs, cell phones. Yet the investigation makes it pretty clear that officers themselves are often a primary source. They're running a lucrative trade smuggling these things in.
So the very tools of corruption, the cell phones?
Became the activists' most powerful weapon, used to expose the violence and the squalor the system was actively trying to hide, or maybe even profiting from.
Okay, so we've seen the secrecy and its consequences. Let's shift to the violence itself, this endemic violence and the, zero accountability culture. The statistics on force are alarming. Use of force incidents in ADOC facilities jumped 47% over the last decade.
47%.
Yeah, and here's the kicker. This happened while the actual prison population dropped by 4,000 people. So that suggests it's not just about overcrowding. The culture of violence itself seems to be escalating.
And when you connect that violence to the bigger picture, you see this huge financial liability landing right on the state, on the taxpayers. Since just 2020, Alabama has settled 94 lawsuits alleging excessive force. Millions paid out. But here's the number that should really make you pause. Over the past 5 years, the state spent $51 million just to defend officers from misconduct lawsuits.
$51 million just for legal defense.
Yeah.
For officers accused of excessive force, often repeatedly. How is that politically sustainable? Wouldn't the pressure be immense to just fire officers costing the state millions instead of defending them over and over?
Well, that's where you hit the core of the political calculation, right? The state choosing to spend that $51 million, it signals this deep institutional protection. By fighting so hard for these officers, even the ones with documented histories of abuse, the system sends a message internally. We've got your back if you enforce order harshly. It almost subsidizes the misconduct. It ensures that culture of violence stays put and accountability, it stays out of reach.
You can see that culture playing out in specific cases, like that 2018 incident at Donaldson. A 145-pound prisoner ends up hospitalized, broken ribs, a collapsed lung. Why? Because a 300-pound officer kneeled forcefully on his back. The supervisor's report claimed only minimum amount of force was used. Minimum.
But when it got to court, a U.S. magistrate judge looked at the evidence and basically said, this doesn't add up. The judge concluded the evidence just couldn't be reconciled with what the officers claimed, found excessive force had occurred.
And sometimes it goes beyond injury. It leads to death.
Exactly. The case of Stephen Davis is one of the most damning in the documentary. He was beaten to death by officers in 2019. The state's official story was neat. Davis refused to drop weapons, knives, they said. But eyewitness accounts from other incarcerated men who were right there, totally different story. They testified Davis yielded immediately, but was beaten beyond recognition anyway.
And the officer involved in Davis's death. What happened to him? This is where that lack of accountability just feels like a dark joke. Officer Roderick Gadsden, reportedly involved in Davis's death, named in over 20 excessive force lawsuits. Was he disciplined? Fired? No, he was promoted to lieutenant twice after Davis's death.
Gadsden's promotion is maybe the single starkest example of ADOC culture. If an officer can be named repeatedly in lawsuits, be involved in a fatality, and then get rewarded with promotions, the message from the institution couldn't be clearer. Violence isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's an endorsed method of control. Sure, the state settled a civil suit with Davis's mother for $250,000, admitting no wrongdoing, of course, but they actively promoted and protected the culture that led to his death.
The human cost is just immense. But we need to shift gears slightly now and look at the powerful financial engine that might be fueling this whole system. Let's talk about the economics here.
Yeah, you absolutely have to talk about the economics. It's impossible to ignore. We're talking about a system of forced labor. It provides something like $450 million annually in goods and services to the state of Alabama. And we use that term forced labor carefully because under U.S. law, it's technically legal. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery except as punishment for a crime. That loophole allows the state to use incarcerated labor in a way that really looks like a modern version of, well, chattel slavery.
And the wage detail just drives that point home, doesn't it? That Jim Crow context. Incarcerated laborers make $2 a day. $2. That's the exact same daily wage rate Alabama set for prison labor almost 100 years ago, 1927.
It's unbelievable. The value they provide is huge, but the pay is stuck in the past. Clearly exploitative.
Right, and it creates this really bizarre contradiction when you think about the state's supposed criminal justice goals. You have men locked up, deemed too dangerous for society, right, for security reasons, but then these same men are shipped out daily to work, cleaning the governor's mansion, working at the state capitol, even being leased out to private companies like Hyundai or fast food distributors.
Exactly. The men who started FAM, like Council and Ray, they saw this inconsistency clear as day. The state trusts them enough to work, sometimes with minimal supervision out in the community, but doesn't trust them enough for parole. It doesn't add up.
And the data seems to back up the idea that money trumps rehabilitation here, this parole paradox. Incarcerated individuals who work are statistically less likely to get parole than those who don't. And overall, parole rates in Alabama have just tanked, dropped by 72%.
72%. It strongly suggests, doesn't it, that when you have a nearly $500 million revenue stream relying on keeping people locked up and working cheap, that financial incentive might just outweigh any real commitment to rehabilitation or even just sensible public safety decisions about release.
Okay, so with all this evidence piling up the violence, the lack of accountability, the labor system, the federal government eventually had to step in.
They did. In 2020, the Department of Justice filed a major lawsuit against ADOC. They cited systematic violence and abuse. They explicitly called the conditions unconstitutional. The DOJ found excessive force was, and I quote, used frequently in almost all of the state's major prisons for men.
And Governor Kay Ivey's response? It was, well, instructive. It echoed that historical resistance to federal oversight you sometimes see in Alabama's history. She basically rejected the DOJ's findings and the need for federal reform as overreach. Her counterplan got that famous name, the Alabama Solution. Her argument was essentially, this is our problem, we'll fix it our way.
But when you look at what her Alabama solution actually entailed, economically speaking, it wasn't about fixing the staffing crisis. It wasn't about tackling the culture of violence that triggered the DOJ lawsuit in the first place. No, it was about building things. Infrastructure. Ivey diverted $400 million in federal COVID-19 relief funds, money meant for pandemic recovery, mind you, plus another $100 million from the state's education budget. all to build 3 massive new prisons.
So the priority was clear. Push back against the feds, build new cages, and avoid touching the rotten core of the system, the accountability, the staffing, the culture.
Precisely. Deny, deflect, and build. Avoid systemic reform at all costs.
Faced with that kind of doubling down from the state, the incarcerated population felt they had only one card left to play, hitting the state where it hurts economically. So in October 2022, Kinetic Justice, Melvin Ray, they led a statewide prisoners' work stoppage. It was an 11-day peaceful protest aimed squarely at shutting down that $450 million labor engine to force the state to listen.
And the state's reaction to this organized, peaceful dissent, it was immediate, it was absolute, and it was brutal. ADOC broke the strike through sheer retaliation. Reports of starving prisoners en masse, physically abusing the leaders, deploying internal tactical teams, your teams, to intimidate, beat people participating. It really showed the lengths the administration would go to, not just to keep order, but specifically to protect that free labor system and the secrecy that enables it all.
So let's try to bring this together. What does this deep dive into these sources really tell us? What should you, the listener, take away?
It paints a really clear and, frankly, disturbing picture. The crisis in Alabama is marked by extreme, escalating violence. Violence that's protected by, let's not forget, $51 million in taxpayer money for legal defense. It's defined by a shocking lack of officer accountability. I mean, promotions for officers involved in deaths and numerous lawsuits, and underpinning it all is this entrenched $450 million forced labor system that creates a powerful financial reason to keep people locked up longer.
Right. And the filmmakers themselves made this point very clearly.
Yeah.
The secrecy, the pushback against accountability, the purely punitive approach. This isn't just an Alabama problem. Alabama might just be the place where the veil was torn most dramatically, thanks to those contraband phones. But the underlying dynamics, they exist elsewhere. We're looking at a system where the costs of abuse, the lawsuits, the federal scrutiny are maybe seen by some as just the cost of doing business. A necessary expense, perhaps, for maintaining a very lucrative, very low-wage workforce.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider. If the core job of ADOC is supposed to be managing people who break rules and disobey commands, what kind of message does it send through the entire system, maybe even nationally, when the government's own response to federal law, to court findings, to peaceful internal dissent is to refuse to comply, to escalate force, to divert money meant for education and public health into building more punitive structures? Is this Alabama solution built on secrecy, denial, and force truly just limited to one state? Or are we actually seeing a kind of model for an American solution in any system where accountability is stripped away and profit, or perhaps just control, becomes the main goal?